Well, I'm finally done ignoring this book. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. As you may or may not know, I had been a long time denier of this book. I think I was a little sore when King first came out with the book and I saw him do press on it, and he stated something along the lines of, I did not write this for the constant readers. I'm like, oh, well, that's a good way to start. And he knows he's got the constant readers. They're going to read everything. But when he said, I wrote this for a different audience, I'm like, all right, well, then I won't be the audience for this book. But really, that was just an excuse because Stephen King came out with so many books, and over the years, I've been trying to diversify and read more authors, different viewpoints, that I just thought, well, one more Stephen King book, whatever, I can let this one go. Unfortunately, this is a book that a lot of Stephen King fans have put on their top 5, top 10 lists. Everybody seems to be blown away, and I did dismiss it in my top 10 Stephen King book video as boomer porn, and I was just trying to be sarcastic and funny, and it didn't come off that way. And a lot of people got upset that I was so hard on the people who lived through the JFK assassination. I wasn't trying to be. I was being a jerk. So I thought I'd make amends, I'd read the book, and then share my actual opinion, an informed opinion, as informed as I can get, and see what you guys think of that opinion, and maybe new readers out there who haven't read it yet might want to hear some things. So it's a spoiler-free review. I'm not going to give away any huge plot twists or specific events, but I will be talking in generalities about the characters and the plot, and to do that, you do have to talk a little bit about some things that happen that you don't like or do like. So I'm going to try to make it as spoiler-free as possible. Unlike somebody else who has a YouTube channel who reviewed the book and gave away a huge spoiler that actually ruined some of my enjoyment of this book. Z-Man. His name begins with a Z. And I promise to be a little bit more responsible with the handling of the spoilers. So let me get into it. So what did I think? Let me start by saying that I loved the book. Most of that love is based on the beginning and the end. The beginning is terrific, hooks you in right away, and wow, very powerful. And the end is a very rare, great Stephen King ending. A lot of times he gets the plane in the air and then he just crashes it in the middle of the jungle and he cashes his check. And the readers get off the plane a little dizzy, but they're like, oh, that was an awesome ride, except for that end. Stephen King creates a perfect ending for this book. It's great. So if you read the book and you're hooked from the front, you're going to like it in the back. That sounds bad. But the middle is flabby. It's a little flabby in the middle. There's there are reasons for that, and maybe I think King was being too self-indulgent. In fact, a lot of this book seems to be King writing for King and only King. So maybe he's right. He didn't write it for the constant reader. He wrote it to just have some sort of fantasy in his own head about a life that maybe he wishes he had led. I don't know. I can't speak to him. I'm just going to do my Kermit the Frog thing and sip my tea. Ain't none of my business. Except this isn't tea, it's coffee. And it is my business because I read the book. So another thing I loved about it is there's this awesome premise. When I first heard about the book, you may know it's about somebody who goes back in time to stop the JFK assassination. And if that's all you know about the book, which is pretty much the cover, and the back cover is what happened if the assassination stopped. So right there on the cover, it's telling you the thrust of this has to do with changing history. And that's cool, but what I thought was, hey, the guy had every opportunity to go back in time and do whatever he wanted, and he chose the JFK thing. where there are many other things that are awful and horrific and need to be stopped. And this guy chose the JFK thing, and it's not like that. There are very finite rules to this time travel. There are limits. And that's good, because time travel stories often get way too messy and convoluted, and people get hung up on the details of the process, and they fall out of the story. Well, in this book, King lays down some very real guidelines that his characters behave within. And it's satisfying because the reader also clings to those guidelines, and the rest of the story then works because you're not going to go off a cliff. There are very good guardrails. Basically, when you travel back in time, you go to the same place. You don't get your say of where you're going to go. So it has to focus what you do there. And a lot of the book has the character Jake Epping toying with the past, figuring out what are the repercussions when you come back to the future or the present, or when you jump between these two times. What will follow you? What are the things that are unintended, bad consequences, and then can I fix them in the going forward? Which is funny, going forward in a time travel book. But because of those restrictions, the main character is forced to interact with the past in a longer term way. So he has to spend a lot of time in the past in order to do his mission. And because he spends time there, well, life happens, and you have to live those days up until the day you need to do the thing. And he grows roots to an extent. I'm not going to say more than that because I don't want to spoil anything, but that creates some of the flab, because then King has to resolve some things that he sets up there, which are somewhat satisfactory. I'm not going to say I cried at any of this book, but I'm not going to say I didn't cry at any of this book. There's some tearjerker moments, but that flab, I wish somebody would have told King, all right, trim some of this. The people are here for this promise and this conclusion, and this middle stuff, you could trim it. I will say it's very effective when you have a character immersed in that different time. You do begin to feel differently about the people who made history. You see them in a different light. You see I know it's fiction and it's all made up, but these are based on historical figures, and it humanizes them in a way, in a very real way, as fictitious as it is. And I think that's really neat. I think it's a great, maybe an extra credit book if you're getting an American history class course. And this would be fun to supplement that fiction based on history. But we do learn a lot about King in this book. He hates the 50s. He hates Dallas. He really does. And he can't hide it. We all know he hates Republicans, so if you just follow him on Twitter, you'll know that too. But these opinions really come out a lot. And I will say, I think this is the first book that King gets across his quirky girl fetish. This is something I can't stand with Holly Gibney, or the first Mr. Mercedes, the first Bill Hodges trilogy book, which has Holly Gibney and it has Bill Hodges' girlfriend, two of the most annoying female characters I've ever read in my life. But there's a character in this book, plays a prominent role, who has like kind of the seed of that quirky girl fetish. That's what I'm going to call it. Stephen King's quirky girl fetish, because he's just kind of enamored with quirky girls. It's a little disturbing. Oddly, the quirky girl fetish makes me want to reread past Stephen King books to see if am I really a Stephen King fan? Because this is the guy who you can see what he really likes and where he puts his energy and what the characters he wants to create. Did they appear previous to this book? Because I can't, it just rubs, I don't know, sound off in the comments if you agree that his fascination with quirky girls. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with quirky girls. I'm not saying that. Or quirky women, or quirky individuals. But the way he borderline obsesses on quirks, I don't know if he thinks he's making a new character or deepening the character, but it gets a little bit like watching Quentin Tarantino do another foot shot in one of his movies. I think that's a good analogy for how I feel about King with his quirky girl thing, and then Quentin Tarantino shooting the feet of Uma Thurman all the time unnecessarily. See what I'm saying? They're putting their own thing in the art. And there's a lot in this book also that's awkward and inappropriate, borderline. Like, if you're unpacking it the way I am, and it may not strike you that way. But I will say he cannot write a good black character, because he puts words in black characters in their mouths that are just 110% cringe. Seriously. And I know he's from the whitest state in the country, so maybe he has no real reference of how people behave. But maybe have these people behave like people instead of caricatures? I don't know. Maybe you need to have a good editor or somebody to bring you in alignment with, like, not being awkward and cringy and borderline offensive. Moving on. There are other things about this book that I dug, like the references to other places and characters in other Stephen King books. That was cool for longtime readers. There's a Plymouth Fury that makes an appearance here and there, and some other things that I don't want to spoil for you. But despite the flabbiness and the quirky girl thing and the poorly written black characters, I really did like the book. I would give it 4 stars. And for me, the best part of the book is the message it's sending. And in my opinion, that message is, what does changing the world mean to an individual? Because we have an idea of changing the world, and that's changing historic events to favor one outcome over another. And of course, then weighing that against the repercussions that might follow. But really, what is the world to an individual? It is your world. And what's important to your world? What would change your world? It's individuals in your life. It's these human connections. It's your parents, your children, your spouse. That's your world. And isn't that worth saving? Isn't that worth sacrifice and effort? Sure, saving JFK, assassinating Hitler, punching Napoleon in the face, I don't know. Those things do hold value. But at what cost? And what are you doing for your corner of the world? And maybe that's something you could work on without going to the past. Maybe that's something you need to work on in the present. But it's a great story, super original. I could totally understand why this book is in people's top 10 Stephen King books. I don't think it makes it into my top 10. It's definitely not in my bottom 5. We'll just say this is a top 11 read. I might like Duma-Keen more. I might like Under the Dome more. But at the end, King tells a really fantastic story, and you're happy for the journey. And the thing he does expertly is include details. I remember an interview with Stephen King once, and he goes, they talk about horror and what's horrific, and the horror is in the details and making the reader feel it. He goes, so it's not enough to say the rat jumped into the person's mouth and started wiggling, but you have to talk about how the person could feel the whiskers on the inside of their throat. And that is the magic of King's storytelling. He makes you feel those whiskers. He makes you live in this world of rules that you readily accept, you believe, and you accept the outcome of those things. And you enjoy it, and you feel like you were there. At the end of this book, you feel like you were in Texas in the late 50s, early 60s. You felt like you knew these people and were involved in their lives, and they become friends to you, and you really like them. Even the quirky woman situation, still, she's a great character. Really liked her. World's better than Holly Gibney. And hey, you know what? I'll take the arrows if they're coming my way over Holly Gibney. I'll take them. So as a longtime Stephen King fan, I think this was a good book for the 2010s Stephen King, but not like late 80s, 70s King. That was some storytelling magic. I think King's gotten to a place where he's a little or a lot self-indulgent, and no editor is going to tell him. I bet you the editors at their cubicle, wherever they work, I imagine they work in cubicles. I don't know. I don't work for a publishing company, but let's say King's editor in their office, they probably got a nice corner office, and underneath the computer monitor, it says, when it comes to Stephen King, just goddamn publish it. Just send it out and turn the paper into money, which is paper. Kind of. It's not got any real value anymore. But don't challenge King and tell him his ideas are too self-indulgent. Just publish it. So that's my take on this book that I've long ignored. I am happy to finally read it and to discover what all the hubbub was about. And I'm glad I liked it. I wish I would have liked it more. Very cool, exciting premise. And if you're a fan of history, this should be very satisfying. Until next time, have a book, have a beverage, don't go in any wormholes changing the past, and stay frosty.
Rule number 1 of time travel, don't time travel into a Stephen King book. If you're a Stephen King character, just stay out of the past. Also, this is a book that gets a little Rose Madder-ish in that flabby middle. I forgot to mention that. He gets the evil husband thing across.